Once upon a time, there lived two men who were exceedingly bright. Their names were Albert and Niels. One was from Germany, the other from Denmark. Mathematical equations swirled in the heads of these men, who occupied much of their time with scientific theories of relativity and the quantum. They debated vigorously and shared a mutual admiration and friendship that lasted throughout their lives. They showed us that you don't have to be a genius to be fair or playful or to do things beautifully.
Okay, ladies.
In the fall of 2012, 8 grandmothers spent 5 weeks working with director Len Barron to prepare for a stage performance about Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr.
This is a story about a sensibility, a kind of awareness and responsiveness. It found expression in the wonder and ideals of Einstein and Niels Bohr all through the course of their lives. The sensibility of these two men does not require genius. It is a quality that is available to any one of us in our daily lives. We're not talking about nuclear science, we're talking about these human beings and how important they were as human beings.
They had a large capacity for enjoyment. The wonder of ordinary things. Hardly any of that has to do with brain power. It has to do with an openness to experience. It has to do with a sense of play, a sense of curiosity. You know, I've been doing the Einstein thing as a solo for now over 20 years. I have been presenting that one-person theater piece for audiences of 10-year-olds to rooms full of scientists. And then came a little twist.
He made a big point about the grandmothers.
I thought, you know, this has real power as a possible ensemble piece. And so I thought to myself, well, who am I going to do it with? Grandmothers came to mind.
And now he said, and now, guess what I'm going to do? Grandmothers.
One of the advantages of being an old man is I know a lot of older women.
I thought, well, that sounds really fun, but grandmothers?
And a bunch of grandmothers going to talk about Einstein and Bohr. How good can it be, you know?
Well, this should be fun. Let's try it out.
Oh, that's so great.
That meant were of a certain age.
It was a stretch.
I wanted no part of it.
I called him up and said, yeah, I'll do it.
My reaction was, yes, I love it.
Barron, this is a brilliant idea. When I began to look around for grandmothers, my first priority was I wanted those 8 women to really get along beautifully with one another. I often say, well, how come you didn't pick grandfathers? Yeah, so that's easy for me, you know? If I want to work with people who are going to get along beautifully with one another and no junk going on and nobody trying to be a boss, of course, you get a bunch of ladies, you know? It's just simple physics.
Who would be better to tell the story than grandmothers?
It's a fairy tale grandmothers are gonna tell the fairy tale.
What I objected to was the idea that it would be Jane Smith, age 74, somebody something, age 84. I happen to have lived my life for the last, since I've been old, on this basis of don't ask, don't tell. Because I think people do judge. They do judge you by age.
So one of the great advantages of being older is that we remember.
Name waiting to be told. What?
Well, one.
Only one? Okay, I'll take one.
At this point in life, even if it sounds like a cliche, we are wiser, you know? We're wise. Now we understand many things.
You know, at the start, they didn't know what it was going to be like. I had told them a bit thing, but mostly it was an act of faith.
There was this fantastic photo of all of us just really enjoying each other's company, enjoying the moment.
And I can bring back that feeling almost immediately when I look at that picture.
And it's showing the personality of each one of us. That was a lot of fun.
And I feel the movement.
It was like we have been doing this for 3 months, and it was, I think, the first night.
The whole idea of the process interested me, of working with other women.
I felt comfortable immediately in that group of women.
It was like, I can't wait to find out more about these other grandmothers.
My goodness, what a collection of lively, beautiful women. We're going to perform this in a month. Easy as pie. Please, please.
From the last line, JoAn.
One time, 4 college.
You're a beautiful woman, and I want that vitality to be there.
I had some concern at various times about some of the women who had less experience in the theater. If we were less rounded or more round, I don't know what the would be.
JoAn Segal had a lot of theatrical experience. A couple of the others had been in a couple of plays.
For instance, May had no background in this at all, and she just worked her little butt off.
But only 3 weeks before, he had written a letter to President Roosevelt.
Part of this was to give expression to what ordinary people could do in presenting Einstein and Bohr. It would have been very different if I got professional actors. JoAn, and Brandon.
Len did a great job of choosing which pieces to give to which people so that he could take advantage of the strengths of each of the readers. It was very nice.
And Sandy.
I had read the whole script, and I particularly liked one of the parts that I was assigned. On walking. For Einstein and Bohr, walking was not only a dear pleasure, it was an indispensable part of their thought processes. I never walk, so I don't know why I related to that. When Werner Heisenberg first came to Copenhagen, Bohr greeted his friend with, "Let's go for a walk." They walked for 3 days, talking physics and making up games along the way. As for Einstein, his love of walking was well known. And when someone asked him, how come walking was so important for him, Einstein replied, "If I didn't walk, there never would have been an Einstein." Einstein and Bohr would often walk with their hands clasped behind their backs. That manner slows you down, and you become
more in tune with the unwilled rhythm of the body. Walking keeps us in touch with our animal nature, in touch with our own rhythm, in touch with the ground, free to wander and daydream, to look about and think, or just to get somewhere. Walking is good for the heart, and good for the mind, and good for the earth, and it is free.
You know, as you heard those lines and you realized how the two friends talked together, Niels Bohr and Einstein, you know, their relationship in walking together and talking together. You know, I thought, yeah, we have so many ways of being together.
Einstein picked up his walking habit early in life. One habit he never picked up was driving. Years later, his wife told a visitor, "Oh no, my husband never learned how to drive. It's much too complicated." Here you have these great minds, and the wisdom of these physicists was just, you know, ordinariness. You know, ordinariness of it out of extraordinary circumstances.
You know, Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. You know, knowledge can only take you so far.
These two men were raised on fairy tales, so they learned at an early age to believe impossible things.
Oh, I have really had a new relationship with Alice in Wonderland. In the 1850s and 60s, Lewis Carroll was teaching mathematics at Oxford and also telling stories to children, from whence came Alice in Wonderland in 1865. "Ah, there's no use trying," said Alice. "One can't believe impossible things." The White Queen answered back, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I practiced a half hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed 6 impossible things before breakfast."
If you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales.
I'm glad I didn't need to know anything about physics, because I don't, of course.
I am so amazed at their work, and because they didn't have anything to manipulate. It's all up here.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of an atom, the idea of splitting it, the idea of time. I thought, when I think of time, it's always, well, how much time do I have, or where, how can I do what do this and then get that done in the time, you know, how you think of time. But I would never think of bending it.
Always drawn to what is elemental, Einstein and Bohr were inspired and educated by the imagination and inventiveness of children. At the Institute for Advanced Studies, there was a nursery school for the children of permanent and visiting faculty. And from time to time, Einstein would stop by to watch the children and sometimes take part in their play. One day, a fairly well-known physicist was visiting the Institute. He walked into the dining room and spotted Einstein, sat down next to him, and asked who was doing the most important work at the Institute. Einstein replied, "If truth be known, the most advanced work being done at the Institute is going on down at the nursery school." The visitor winced, got up and walked out of the room. Einstein turned to a colleague and said, "Isn't it remarkable how someone can know so much and understand so little?"
It was that lightness of spirit that so nicely drew Einstein and Bohr together. But it wasn't until April of 1920 that they actually met in person. Paul Ehrenfest, who was recognized as the foremost physics teacher in Europe, was a dear friend of both the men. And before the meeting, he wrote to Einstein, "Now you will meet Bohr and you will love him." Shortly after the meeting, Einstein wrote to Ehrenfest, "Bohr was here, and I am in love with him. He is like an extremely sensitive child who moves around this world in a sort of trance."
I love Niels Bohr. Here is this absolute giant in physics, that one of the two greatest physicists, of the 20th century. And here was a guy who had this great, astounding relationship with his children and his grandchildren. I just fell in love with Niels Bohr.
The Bohrs, Niels and Marguerite, were models of kindness. And with a house full of children, there were occasions when being fair was part of the conversation around the dinner table. For Bohr, being fair was more than a moral issue. For in being fair, one witnesses people and events in a clearer light. Fairness is at the root of wisdom. It all begins with being fair.
Niels Bohr spent a lot of time in the company of children. He was especially pleased to be with his grandchildren at the family summer home in Tisfield. In this setting on the edge of the forest, he took them for walks through the forest, where, as everyone knows, the trolls dwell. A photographer caught him once, going through all the motions of delighted tasting to convince an unconvinced granddaughter that the cereal was the most delectable of foods. Then, turning philosophical, as he was prone to do, he said, in their joyful eagerness, one witnesses the potentialities of human life at its best. Children have expectations of everything. For Bohr and Einstein, it was a matter of simple observation. In a child, we see the wonder and awe within us all.
Niels Bohr was mentor and companion to two groups of people. The physicists who came to Copenhagen to work with him and his children and grandchildren. The physicists came from everywhere. They were the young stars of the world of physics. The first line of business was quantum mechanics, and Copenhagen was the very center of that dazzling enterprise. In the spirit of open and critical inquiry, these brilliant theorists ate and worked together. They walked, they skied, they made music, and went to movies together. And they played ping pong, the favorite indoor sport at the Institute. And these wild-minded theorists, they also had great fun playing soccer with the Bohr's children. The mixing of ages was a keen passion for Bohr.
At Bohr's Institute, there was time for play, and he was fond of films, especially Western cowboy movies. One evening, he went to see a film with George Gamow, Lev Landau, and Hendrik Kasmer. After the movie, they talked about something that puzzled Bohr. How come the bad guys appear to draw first, but it was the good guys who shot the bad guys? Well, they talked about that for a while and then went off to bed. The next morning at breakfast, Bohr declared that he had solved the dilemma. He explained that the bad guys had to make a conscious decision as to when to draw, while the good guys responded intuitively, and they naturally won. Gamow shouted out, "Bohr, this time you've gone too far." Not one to be deterred, once he got an idea, Bohr said, Let's test it out. So they went to a shop and bought cap pistols. They walked back to the Institute, and 3 bright lights in physics lined up on one side, Bohr on the other. Each of the 3, one at a time, drew first. Bohr shot them all.
Without that sense of playfulness, life tends to be more rigid and, of course, less fun. Less fun.
On one occasion, a young colleague came to work with Bohr at his summer home in Tisville. The physicist was surprised to see a horseshoe over the door, and he said, "Bohr, you don't believe in that horseshoe business, do you?" Bohr replied, "Of course not, but they say it works whether you believe it or not."
You know, what wisdom, you know, and how much fun.
That childlike sense of wonder and curiosity, they never lost that.
Many people have written about the lives of Einstein and Niels Bohr, but no one has expressed the elemental nature of these 2 men so simply and beautifully as Nobel laureate biologist George Wald. He wrote, "Einstein and Bohr were without a doubt the 2 greatest persons I ever met. They had accomplished that wonderful thing of becoming wiser and more learned children as they grew older. I thought sometimes of a man walking a puppy. A man walks in a straight line, and a puppy is into everything. And Einstein and Bohr both went like a puppy. They had a large capacity for enjoyment."
The sense of playfulness, yeah, to have fun.
He says that to every
That was one of Len's magic things.
The important thing is to have a good time. Have fun with it. Be bold. Oh, I know how to make this even more fun.
He was really cute, the way he kept saying, get your body with his Boston accent.
If your body is engaged, there's an energy going out.
Get your body in it, get your body in it.
So play it big, because the body, get the body.
He is not a seasoned theatrical director. And sometimes he sort of could use a little extra push in that area.
You just have to remember what you think is loud isn't loud. It's more your body that I want.
But I don't think he's aiming for stage perfection kind of thing.
This is what we're doing. It's a dramatic conversation with the audience, yeah? And we're playing ourselves. We don't have to play anybody but ourselves, you know?
So it was kind of like a little magical space where people came together and whatever unfolded, but there were no expectations or prior associations to get in the way of what was immediate.
What Len chose, or what he put together for us to read, made them real individuals and real people with children and tragedy and love, all these things.
The one I remember most clearly was the one about sailing. That intuitive energy, that root feeling, gifted them with an affinity for the natural world. They were both avid sailors. You had to see Einstein in a small sailboat to realize the strength of the roots that bound him to a simple outdoor life. Wearing sandals and an old sweater with his hair ruffling in the breeze, he would stand upright, rocking with the sail he was maneuvering. He was absurdly happy as soon as he reached the water. Einstein's friends often talked about his indifference to danger. He loved to sail in rough weather, and on several occasions he had to be towed in because of a broken mast. Friends got upset with him because he refused to carry a life jacket on board, which was a real hazard because he never learned how to swim. Bohr, in his usual social ways, owned a boat with two friends. They called the cutter Cheetah. For Bohr, being at sea was one of the great earthly delights. For all the pleasures of sailing, the great tragedy in Bohr's life was the drowning of Christian, his and Marguerite's firstborn. I am a very emotional person, you know. I cry at the drop of a hat, and it's very hard to keep my emotions from overcoming me as I'm reading about this man's son. Christian was 17 and had just graduated from high school. He was hurled overboard when the boat was struck by a huge breaker. Though he was a good swimmer, the high seas proved too much, and he disappeared in the waves. Bohr's friends had to hold Niels from jumping into the water because it would have meant he too would have drowned. On August 26th, family and friends gathered to celebrate the life of Christian. Bohr spoke of Christian's passion for art and science and eased the grief by talking of the joy that Christian had brought to him and Marguerite, to his grandparents, brothers, and his friends. Bohr reminded the gathering that the people we love never die, and that Christian would always be alive in their hearts.
To me, has always been a mystery of how much he knew about each one of us, which I doubt he knew a lot about, at least about me, how he knew that I love children, that education is my passion, and that trust. We're so me, you know?
As profound as was their work in physics, their thoughts and practice in education were of the same nature. Einstein saw no causal relationship between competence in reading, writing, and mathematical skills and being an imaginative, generous-hearted human being. The 3 R's are crucial and critical tools. Nevertheless, they are only tools. The purpose of education is to nurture thoughtfulness. The lesser function of thinking is to solve puzzles and problems. The essential purpose is to decide for yourself what is of genuine value in life, and then to find the courage to take your own thoughts seriously.
I love that part. I love that part because I'm telling it to myself.
In 1952, Einstein wrote an article titled Education for Independent Thought. Overemphasis on the competitive system and premature specialization on the grounds of immediate usefulness kills the spirits on which all cultural life depends, specialized knowledge included.
I wanted to do it like all of us. I wanted to do it super right. And my accent was getting in the way.
And you will be in the company of someone who lives
I wanted people to understand what I was saying because it sounded so important. The message is so amazing, so profound. And here I am. Like, oh my God, I need to get my act together.
It was difficult sometimes to understand her with that Mexican accent.
I could say with passion, I could speak louder, but nobody knew what I was saying.
You are saying the building of blocks. It's the building blocks.
Oh, the building of blocks.
Yeah.
I keep saying that.
You keep saying that. Yes, I know you do.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll get it.
Yeah,
Don't worry,
the
we'll
building
get
blocks.
it. Len comes and said, Teresa, don't you worry. Forget that sentence. Don't, skip it and move on. And I said, no, I'm gonna say it. I have to say it. I can't. That's an important piece. And just because my crazy mouth can't pronounce it, that doesn't mean I'm not gonna say it.
Einstein said, let us not forget that knowledge and skills alone cannot lead humanity to a happy and dignified life. Something more is needed to produce a truly educated person. The magic of Einstein was in the something more. A mix of fairness, beauty, and playfulness. The building blocks, the energy field for encouraging wonder, discipline, and a generous heart. The proof is in the pudding. Find anyone whose life is grounded in these qualities, and you will be in the company of someone who lives a fertile life and is dearly loved. It is a beautiful equation.
From the very beginning of each performance, I felt the audience with us. I felt their energy, I felt their openness, I felt their delight. You could hear it in the laughter and the responses to certain parts that were humorous.
In all the history of human thought, there is perhaps no greater dialogue than that which took place between Einstein and Bohr on the meaning of the quantum. They argued that question for 30 years, and there is no greater testimony to that dialogue than Bohr's summary of it in his article, Discussions with Einstein on the Epistemological Problems in Atomic Physics. It was written in honor of Einstein's 70th birthday. Oh, how these two men adored each other, but when it came to physics, that was a different story. Once they were working on a problem, and neither said anything for quite a while. And then Einstein's head popped up and he said, "This is so beautiful, God could not have passed it by." Bohr turned to him and said, "Einstein, stop telling God what to do."
When Einstein and Bohr stalled at a point, each had a way of clearing the air. Bohr would go out and chop wood. He loved chopping wood. That pure animal energy would blow away the dust, and then he would wash his face and go back to work. Einstein took a different tack. He would get his violin and make music. He loved the physicality, the stunning slowness of that long, last note.
Einstein's thought process was visual in nature. He said, "I very rarely think in words at all. A thought comes, and I may try to express it in words afterward." He added, "When I examine myself and my methods of thought, I come to the conclusion that the gift of fantasy has meant more to me than my talent for absorbing knowledge." When he said imagination is more important than knowledge, he was simply noting that knowledge can only take you so far. The truly sublime ideas, said Einstein, do not spring from a logical thought process. Concepts are created by a free leap of our imagination. The nature of the leap is and will remain unknown.
All through the 1920s, Einstein received invitations to speak at universities and other groups throughout Europe. In 1926, he gave a talk for the annual meeting of the German Physical Society about a theory that he had been working on for several months. He talked for about an hour while filling the blackboard with equations. When he was finished, the chairman opened the session for questions. For a moment, the packed hall was absolutely silent. And then a young man in the back, he was 18 years old, raised his hand and said, "What Professor Einstein has told us is quite marvelous, only the second equation does not strictly follow from the first. It requires an assumption that is not proven." Well, everyone in the hall turned around. Who is this young man challenging Einstein? But Einstein wasn't looking at the student. He turned around and looked at the blackboard. It took a minute or so, and then he turned around and he smiled and he said, "What that young man in the back has said is absolutely correct. You can forget everything I said today."
Any work that calls itself a fairy tale is liable to include a king and a queen. On one of Einstein's visits to Brussels, he was invited to the palace of King Albert and Queen Elizabeth of Belgium. Einstein wrote a letter to his wife Elsa, telling her about meeting the king and queen. He wrote, "I was received with touching warmth. These two people are of a purity and kindness seldom found. First, we talked for about an hour. Then the Queen and I played quartets and trios with two other ladies. This went on merrily for several hours. Then the women went off and I stayed behind for dinner with the king and queen, vegetarian style, and there were no servants. We had a kingly meal of spinach, hard-boiled eggs, and potatoes, period." If there were a Nobel Prize for a gracious relationship between a man and a woman, it would be shared by Einstein and Queen Elizabeth of Belgium. Soon after they met, they began writing to each other. In 1931, Einstein was in Santa Barbara, California, and learned that the Queen had visited there some years before, which prompted him to write her a note. "Dear Queen," he always called her Queen, "2 days I have been staying in this carefree corner where wind and cold and heat are unknown. Yesterday, I was shown a dreamy villa where you had spent a few happy, quiet days some years ago. 2 years later, in February 1933, Einstein was again in Santa Barbara and sent the Queen a small twig together with a short poem. In Cloister Garden, a small tree stands, planted by your very hands. It sends its greetings to convey a twig, for it itself must stay." The Queen replied in kind. By that time, the Nazis had come to power and had confiscated Einstein's property and his bank account, and were calling him an enemy of the state. Near the end of her rhyme, the Queen obliquely refers to this and plays on the name of Einstein, which means one stone. She writes, "The twig the greeting did convey, from the tree that had to stay, and from the friend whose heart so big could send great joy by tiny twig. 1,000 thanks aloud I cry, unto mountain, sea, and sky. Now when stones begin to shake, I pray one stone no harm will take.
While Einstein and Bohr struggled with the hidden secrets of physics, throughout their lives, they wrote, spoke out, and took action on the critical issues of the time.
I was born in 1926, so I lived through a lot of that we're talking about, and World War II is still very, very powerful in me. I was in high school and college at that time.
Bohr's mother was Jewish, and when the Nazis occupied Denmark, Bohr, who had opportunities to leave, decided to stay so as not to discourage the Danish people. However, in September of 1943, George Duckwitz, a high German official, advised two Danish political leaders that the Nazis were soon coming to round up the Jews. On the night of September 29th, Bohr and his wife were secretly taken aboard a fishing boat and arrived the next day safely in Sweden. Bohr asked for a meeting with the king, who quickly responded. Bohr asked the king to grant asylum to the Danish Jews. The king, at risk himself, said yes. And over the next few days, of the almost 8,000 Jewish Danes, 7,220 of them escaped on boats at night and safely arrived the next day in Sweden.
When I'd read that part, I was feeling it emotionally a lot and thinking, yeah, we've been through things like this before, horrible things, and we don't have to do those same things to each other now.
And Einstein he believed in peace. He wanted reconciliation amongst nations.
Einstein said, we must not only tolerate differences between individuals and between groups, but we should indeed welcome them and look upon them as an enriching experience. Einstein spoke of the horrid treatment of blacks in America. He said, the more I feel like an American, the more this situation pains me. I can escape the feeling of complicity in it only by speaking out.
Justice, civil rights, I've lived through some of that.
In 1937, Marian Anderson, the world-renowned black contralto, was coming to Princeton to perform a concert, but she was denied a room at the Nassau Inn. Einstein heard about it, and he invited Miss Anderson to stay at his home. On other visits to Princeton, she always stayed with Einstein. Her last visit was 1 month before he died. During the visit, he improvised on the piano, and Miss Anderson, she sang a song for her dear friend. From Einstein and Niels Bohr, we hear, it is not the role of ideals to be realized. It is enough if fine but unattainable ideals influence our morals. It is a task never finished, something always present to guide our judgment and to inspire our conduct.
The quality that shaped the lives of Einstein and Niels Bohr was the feeling of trust.
Trust is so small, the piece is so small, but it's so powerful. I didn't want it to get lost.
It is not coincidental that parents and teachers share the same job: to foster trust. When that quality is well seated, all manner of wonder and affection abound.
So often we don't develop trust amongst young people because we think we know it all. We've experienced a lot of things. We're older, so they need to listen. But we haven't developed any trust.
When we're in the company of people we trust, we feel comfortable, we feel free to be ourselves. Trust, you know, trust.
So, do we have everybody yet? Yes, we have everybody.
Hello.
In the 5 weeks we worked together, and then the performance, and then time spent afterwards, there wasn't one moment of discord.
Len, did you see we were using our bodies? Did you see that? Our body. We were using our bodies.
It was a perfect collection of people working together, celebrating each other, and everybody rooting for everybody.
The vulnerability was a shared vulnerability, and everybody was kind. And I think when you feel like you're in a circle of kindness, the vulnerability is not fearful. It's precious.
It's very nice to have an idea, and then poof, it's real.
One of the beauties of this project is to give people the courage to take their own thoughts seriously, as the saying goes.
The main thing is to have a good time, you know, because they're gonna love you.
We can only speculate what Einstein and Bohr would share with us if they were around today. Given their sense of wonder, they might well remind us that time was invented so we could change our minds. It is an evolutionary gift. Guiding their thought and work, two considerations were paramount. The first was beauty. Einstein said that beauty is the first test. Whatever the inquiry, the solution was to be found in discovering the beautiful. The beauty in the structure of the stars, or in a single atom, is also true of human experience. For that which sustains life is beautiful, kindness and empathy, curiosity and courage, a grand sense of play, and a profound regard and love for the natural world.
You know, looking at just things like kindness and empathy, that's beautiful.
It has a real feeling to it. There's an energy to situations which are beautiful. It's also true of human experience. You know, when you're involved with people who are giving and open, it feels wonderful.
The second consideration is that Einstein and Bohr were always on the lookout for unifying principles. Their passion was discover the sameness in that which appears to be different. All the rest are only details. In the human species, the details are race and religion, and gender and nationality, all interesting details, but nevertheless, they're only details. The root, the grand commonality is that we are mothers and fathers. Whether we have children or not, it's built in. Nothing in the human experience is as powerful as the love that parents feel for their children. Whatever its frailties, that relationship remains the clearest expression of love and support. And if that relationship is the bedrock of human life, it is also true that parents in every corner of the earth have more in common with each other than they do with certain policies of their own governments. Therein lies the common ground from which we can move on.
In the early years of the 20th century, Einstein and Niels Bohr gave us a new story about the nature of the universe. And now they offer a fresh and bold story for the years ahead. These two men were reared on fairy tales, so they learned at an early age to believe impossible things. For Einstein and Bohr, fairy tales are the embodiment of our highest ideals, our sense of the possible. Fairy tales are the seeds for a state of mind. So, if Einstein and Bohr were around today, they would offer a fairy tale for people of all ages. An Einstein-Bohr fairy tale is one in which everyone is rooting for everyone. Imagine that! Everyone rooting for everyone.